All right, welcome everyone. I'm Emmanuel. I'm program manager here at the Conduit. Welcome to the Conduit Online. So we're really delighted to have you here today and trying out our new online platform. So before we begin with today's topic, I just want to put in place a few housekeeping rules so that everyone is comfortable with what is happening and how to use the platform. Number one, you will all be on mute. So you won't be able to speak at this event, but if you go down at the bottom of your Zoom page, you have a little icon that says Q&A, and that's where you can type in questions for the Q&A section of this Fireside chat. We also have a few things in terms of oh, sorry, I was going to say, in case you do find yourself either buffering or freezing, it might be your internet connection. So just double check it. If needed, just log off and use the same link to log back into the event. You'll be able to use it without any problem and join the conversation at any time. We will, in any case, be recording this event, so we'll share the recording afterwards. You're welcome to watch it again or share it with those around you. But so if you do feel that your internet connection has let you down, there is help along the way and you'll be able to catch up afterwards. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Hannah McInnes. Hannah is a freelance journalist, interviewer, and podcast host. She works regularly with the How To Academy, who were our partners on this project, but unfortunately, due to the nature of the current situation in the UK, had to pull out of the event. But we're really pleased to have Hannah and Sarah with us here tonight. So over to you, Sarah. Hannah, sorry.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, or perhaps it's good afternoon or good morning if you're joining us from outside the UK. Thank you very much for being here. I can see the participant number going up in the corner of my screen. I'm so thrilled to welcome everyone in these rather extraordinary circumstances. And thanks to the sort of brilliant technology, I probably better not speak to you soon, and intuition of the Conduit Club. I'm so thrilled that it can go ahead, and then delighted that I can be in conversation with Sarah this evening, who's of course joining us from the US. I'm sure many of you know she has had a pretty exceptional career. 2009 to 2017, she worked in the White House, serving as head speechwriter for the First Lady Michelle Obama and for President Barack Obama. And before that, she was the chief speechwriter to Hillary Clinton on her 2008 campaign. And before that, for Senator John Kerry and for General Wesley Clark during the 2004 presidential election. We're going to, of course, delve a little bit into that, but that's not the focus. Really, the inspiration for tonight, and I'm going to put it in the screen, I hope you can see it, is her inspirational, brilliant book, Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism, after finally choosing to look there. And it makes it clear, and that talks, of course, about her discovering Judaism and her sort of ever-evolving, I think we would call it, relationship with it. So Sarah, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll certainly let you describe that relationship in your own far better words than mine. But you say in the book you once viewed Judaism as if it were a dull, distant relative whom I loved in a vague familial way and was requested to see a few times a year but had no desire to get to know any further. What changed? I'm assuming something changed.
Yes, well, first of all, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this conversation. I want to thank the Conduit Club for, on very short notice, scrambling to move this online. I really appreciate this. I know everyone is really overwhelmed right now, and the fact that so many people work together to make this happen, I'm just incredibly grateful. So thank you. And thanks to all of you for taking the time to tune in tonight. So it's funny, I like many American Jews, grew up in a household where Judaism meant going to my synagogue twice a year for these kind of dull, incomprehensible services with a lot of Hebrew and prayer. And then at Passover, we would have a Seder, and it was also very long and dull. And that was Judaism, right? 3 kind of dull holidays. And once I had my bat mitzvah, which is a coming of age ceremony that you have at the age of 13, I said, like, okay, that's enough. Right? I don't, I'm culturally Jewish. I'm Jewish by heritage. I'm proud to be Jewish, but I don't need to actually engage with Judaism in any meaningful way. If I want meaning or spiritual connection, I'll have to find it elsewhere. So fast forward 25 years later, I broke up with a guy I was dating at the age of 36. I had a lot of time on my hands. I was very bored and very lonely. And I happened to get an email about an Intro to Judaism class at the local Jewish Community Center in Washington, D.C. And I figured, you know what? I need to fill some time. I should know something about Judaism because I know nothing. I'll just take this class to get out of my apartment. And I have to tell you, I was completely blown away by what I learned in that class. There was so much wisdom about what it means to be human, about how to be a good person, particularly in challenging times, about how to live a meaningful, purposeful life, about how to find profound spiritual connection. And I just couldn't believe this. I thought to myself, where has this been all my life? And so I took more classes, I read hundreds of books, I started attending silent week-long Jewish meditation retreats. That is actually a thing. And what I found was there are a lot of really excellent kind of intro, how-to, nuts and bolts kinds of books that are helpful with the basics. And then there are many excellent, very academic, really esoteric books that are pretty serious and that you need a lot of background to understand about Judaism. But there wasn't anything in the middle for someone like me that both covers the basics and really unearthed the deeper insights about Judaism, the really relevant, timely, powerful wisdom that it has to offer, not just Jews, but people of all faith backgrounds and none right now. So I thought, maybe I'm a writer, maybe I could write this book. Once I started writing the book, I figured out pretty quickly why no one had written this book, because Judaism, it's very hard to put it all together. It's a 4,000-year-old, vast, deep, very complex tradition, and there's no natural beginning. Everything is kind of hyperlinked to everything else. So it was challenging. This was much harder than writing speeches in the White House, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, you say that it often makes you feel very foolish, and learning about Judaism is the second hardest intellectual challenge you've ever taken, and the hardest was writing about it. But what do you mean when you say it often makes you feel foolish? You're overwhelmed by it?
Yeah, I think the way that I sometimes feel is that, Judaism is so deep and vast and rich that even after learning a lot, I still realize, there's always a level deeper. There's always another layer that I could untangle here. And I think at first, when I first started learning, there were just so many times when I just didn't know what was even going on. I would go into a synagogue and not even be able to understand what we were doing or why we were doing it. Or I would go to a dinner at Shabbat, which is the Jewish Sabbath. It's every week from Friday night to Saturday night. It's basically a day of rest where you go offline, you spend time with families. It's at a typical Shabbat dinner, there are rituals and prayers, and I didn't know them, so I felt kind of embarrassed. And especially, my name is Sarah Hurwitz. Like, could you have a more Jewish name? People, I think, expected that someone with such a Jewish name must know all there is to know about Judaism, and the fact is I didn't. But I began to realize, no one knows all there is about Judaism. You could spend a million lifetimes learning about Judaism, and there's always a level deeper that you can go. So I've actually now I don't feel that way so much anymore, because I've accepted that in some ways we're all always beginners.
That feels like one of the most important things that comes across all the way through the book, that for you, the idea that it's constant discovery, exploration, challenging, wrestling, interpreting, that one of the most important things you feel you want to tell people is that you have to approach it with curiosity, and there's no one way to be Jewish.
Yes. I mean, you've put your finger on what I think is one of the central defining characteristics of Judaism. If you are looking for dogma, if you are looking for simplistic rules to follow, Judaism is not your religion, right? This is the entire project and process of Judaism revolves around questioning, debate, arguing, doubting, dissenting, right? I think one thing I struggled with my book is that every sentence I wrote, I could immediately think of 10 counter arguments to that sentence. This is how Judaism has evolved, right? It's actually similar. I think an analogy I often use here in the US is that, we have our US Constitution, which was created centuries ago. And over the past 250 odd years, we've been reinterpreting it through our Supreme Court cases, through legislative amendments. We've been sort of reinterpreting it, re-understanding it. So we outlawed slavery, thank God, terribly evil. We allowed women to vote. We've been amending that document. And Judaism is actually very similar with the Torah, which is our key holy document, which consists of the first 5 books of what Christians refer to as the Old Testament. Jews refer to it as the Tanakh. So those 5 books are really our holiest texts, but they're 2,500 years old, right? They have all sorts of ancient, crazy stuff in there. So for 2,500 years, we've been reimagining, reinterpreting, re-understanding them for modern times. So 2,000 years ago, ancient rabbis looked at language that said an eye for an eye, and they said, no. Clearly what that means is that if someone puts out your eye, they have to compensate you monetarily, of course, right? They were reinterpreting it, just like we've done with our founding documents in the US. So I think that is very much the process of Judaism, and I so appreciate that intellectualism. I so appreciate that embrace of questioning and doubting and dissenting, because I think religions can get into very dangerous territory when they become dogmatic, when they refuse questioning. So this is something that's been something I really appreciated about it.
I suppose the downside or the possible worry of that is that if people can interpret it to meet their own ends.
And that, my friend, is the downside of any human created system. I mean, you put your finger again on something else I think is a critical point. There were people who tried to continue who argued against amending our Constitution to outlaw slavery. They liked slavery. They were slave owners, right? They were interpreting it in a way that I think was profoundly evil, but that was in their interests. And that is true of any political system. That's true of any religious system. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, these are human created systems, and we need to interpret them with heart and compassion and love. And, I think an argument I often get against religion is, well, religion is responsible for so many of the world's evils. Yeah. And you know what? So was Stalinism. Totally godless system. How many millions of people died as a result of Stalinism, right? Political systems, religious systems, they can be twisted and manipulated for deeply evil purposes. And, so from my perspective, I think the core animating idea of Judaism is that we're all created in the image of God, all created in the image of the divine. And I don't care if you're an atheist, you don't have to believe in any kind of God or divine to understand the power of that idea. Basically, what that idea means, as a rabbi named Yitz Greenberg has beautifully put it, he said, what that means is every single human being is infinitely worthy. We are all totally equal to each other, and each of us is unique. There's no one else like us on this planet. So when I think about how Judaism needs to be interpreted in modern times, it needs to be run through the filter of that idea. So, I think it's very important that women be treated equally, because when I run it through that filter in the image, I think, well, yeah, women have infinite worth and they're equal to men, and each of them is unique. So, when there is a small percentage of the Jewish world, 10% here in America, that sort of draws distinctions on gender, I say, wait a second, that seems to me in violation of that core animating ideal. So you do have to look at what is the core animating ideal, and you have to interpret the laws in light of that.
I mean, you were mentioning obviously God in that, and you talk a lot in the book. It's another, well, perhaps the chapter where you're most questioning and most kind of full of contradictions. What is God for you? Because you're always exploring that as you go through. Who or what is God for you?
Yeah, growing up, going to my synagogue and reading this prayer book, I didn't have the learning and education to see how sophisticated and complicated it is. Just to me, knowing nothing and reading it in a very literal, surface way, I thought it was this sort of groveling, repetitive prayers to some being, some man in the sky who controls everything and rewards you if you're good and punishes you if you're naughty. And I thought, well, even at age 11, I thought, like, I don't believe in that. I seek evidence to the contrary every hour of every day. You're telling me that when an abused child asks God for help, God is saying no to her? I find this obscene. I'm not going to believe in this. That's just simply not true. And I feel equally, if not more strongly, about that conception now. So I thought, okay, well, if I don't believe that, I guess I'm an atheist, or maybe I'm spiritual but not religious, whatever that means. And it turns out actually that's not what Judaism says about God. What I've discovered in my exploration of Jewish tradition is that there are these incredibly complex, diverse ideas about God in Judaism, because in Judaism, there is no dogma of God. There is no creed or definition of God that everyone agrees on. which I am so proud of, because I think that that reflects this fundamental humility that we as Jews have, where we say, like, we're talking about something so much bigger than our tiny little human minds can grasp. So to define it, to say God is this and God wants that, it's almost a kind of idolatry. It's a kind of blasphemy. Instead, we've just tons of different conceptions of God in Judaism that I think are a way of gesturing at something that's too big for us to even comprehend. So, there are the mystical Jews who say that God is everything. You are God. I am God. All of us are God. We are, everything is divine. The homeless man who I walk by on the street, that man is God. That man is a manifestation of the divine. So if you actually look at the world that way, changes how you think about treating other people a little bit. There's Martin Buber, the Jewish philosopher, who says that God is what arises between two people in deep human relation, who are fully contemplating each other's humanity. In that moment of profound human interaction, what arises between them is God. There is a thinker named Mordecai Kaplan who says that God is the process by which we become our highest and truest selves. Now, none of these are a man in the sky, right? And each of them to me alludes to something, gestures at something. So I think the theology for me was very important in realizing that Judaism had really rich, complicated theology. I also think experience is very important. There's a wonderful rabbi named Art Green who's written many books. And he says in one of his books, which I quote in my book, he says, think about the moment when your child was born, or you were holding the hand of your parent as they took their last breath, or you were standing out at night looking at the vast sky, just feeling so tiny in this infinite universe, or you were out in nature, or experiencing a piece of art or music that just swept you away, or in deep relation with another person. We've all had these moments, I think, feel transcendent. We might call them spiritual moments. We maybe don't have the perfect language to articulate it, but these are transcendent moments. It's like, wait, okay, can we start to think about God in those contexts? And I think attending silent meditation retreats as well, for me, was a really important experience, because over the course of a week, just praying, meditating, letting my mind quiet down, I was able to kind of touch into something that I feel like an idiot when I try to articulate it. And I think oftentimes talking about God cheapens God, because it's something that's so far beyond the ability of my little brain and mouth to articulate. But I felt like I touched into something very big and very intimate, and that felt to me like a force of some kind of boundless love. And it's something that I touch into only rarely in a serious way, but it has stayed with me. And I feel a greater sense of daily awe and wonder and openness because of it. So I think all of that together, the theology, the experience, has just opened my mind beyond that kind of God-shaped wall of like the old man, shaped like an old man with a beard. And I just would look at it and think like, come on, really? This is what you're offering me? But it's not. Judaism has so much to offer, not just for Jews, but for people of all faith backgrounds and none.
You said there, I feel silly articulating it. And there is this sense all the way through your book, you talk about your unease, you feel silly, you feel quite self-conscious, embarrassed. And lots of times I think you wanted in the church to pray in darkness so people see you. Why is that? Do you feel that sense of self-consciousness? Because you talk very articulately and very passionately about it here. But
yeah, I think that a big part of it is that here in the US, unfortunately, the loudest religious voices tend to be the most bigoted, the most hateful, and the most stupid. They have, in a way, hijacked the conversation around religion. And it is so maddening to me, because there are millions and millions of people here and around the world who are thoughtful religious voices, intellectual religious voices, compassionate and loving religious voices, but they don't get very much media attention, because actually, instead of ranting and screaming about how we should kill gay people or whatever kind of horrors these, hateful people are screaming about, these loving, compassionate, thoughtful voices of faith, they're actually doing the work of faith, right? They're feeding the hungry, they're helping the homeless, they're tending to those who are most in need. And so I think that, I have some self-consciousness of trying to share my thoughts about a religion, because I think so many people are so rightfully hesitant about religion. I think so many thoughtful people have been so turned off by the ugliness and stupidity of, at least in America, of our national conversations. They say, yeah, I'm spiritual, but not religious. Yeah, I'm not, this isn't really for me. And I just find that so frustrating. And I feel like I've internalized some of that. Like, oh, religion isn't for smart people. Oh, if you're religious, that means checking your brain at the door and believing in irrational and crazy things. And I'm a very rational person. I'm, an educated intellectual person. So I feel some self-consciousness about it. And I'm honest about that because I want my book to be relatable to people like me who are hesitant about engaging with religion.
And are there parts then in honest speaking that you still struggle with?
Absolutely. I mean, with Judaism, I will say something that I take heart in is that anything that I find problematic in Judaism has at this point been reinterpreted, right? Like I think, in the kind of Judaism that 90% of American Jews practice, women are rabbis, gay people are rabbis, we do gay marriages. That's it, it's a very, I think, progressive and egalitarian American Jewish tradition that I'm very proud of and that feels really comfortable and natural to me. So I think one thing that I struggle a little bit with is that I'm not married, I don't have kids, and a lot of Judaism, a lot of the life cycle rituals in Judaism very much are centered around families, right? They're around weddings, around births of babies, around bar and bat mitzvahs for your child. So when you're someone who's single and doesn't have kids, it becomes a little bit harder to participate in some ways. I think sometimes. I think many synagogues are structured around families, so it's a little awkward for a single person to engage. So I think, but that's something that so many people are aware of today, especially as families change and become much more diverse, and households are just much more diverse in their form and their number of people. So you're seeing today, many Jewish institutions and synagogues here in the US and probably elsewhere are innovating to be more inclusive of people from really diverse backgrounds.
And one of the chapters that felt very relevant, particularly now with what you're going through, is with what we're all, sorry, not you, we're all collectively going through. Is when you talk about becoming a great person. It feels that so much of it applies to our very modern world, and this sort of idea of the shame culture and in fact gossiping relating to social media and where that's rife. And these are considered serious sins. It's one of the things that you dwell on and actually pulls you to Judaism as well.
Yeah. So it's, you're so right. Like this, I wrote a chapter on Jewish ethics that many people who've read the book, many of whom are not Jewish, have said, "Oh man, that chapter really stuck with me." I mean, the reality is that the ethic of secular life today is basically you do what you want as long as you don't hurt others. I think the ethic of a lot of modern law in many Western countries is, do what you want, but just don't steal other people's property or infringe on their civil rights or liberties or hurt them physically. Which is like, when you think about it, it's quite a low bar, right? There's nothing about honesty, generosity, compassion, love, kindness. And of course, national laws shouldn't be covering those topics, right? That's not the province of law, of secular law, but it is the province, I think, of religious law and of Jewish law. So studying Jewish law, I always thought I was a good person, and it just made me realize that, yeah, of course I'm a good person, but I'm not yet a great person. I think even just studying the laws around speech, which you mentioned, I mean, Judaism has a real, very intense set of laws around gossip, around shaming others. And, when you think about it, how often every day do I gossip? How often do we shame other people on social media and kind of humiliate them and try to make them look bad? I mean, that's almost like our national and international discourse these days. And Judaism just has tremendous abhorrence for shaming people, right? There is a whole set of laws around rebuking people, which you do privately when you're trying to say, look, you're doing something wrong here, but you do it privately, you do it kindly, you try not to humiliate them. I also think, something like gossip, I mean, just contemplate a scenario where, you and I are colleagues and we get into a fight one night and I'm so angry at you. So I leave work and I go home and I call a bunch of people. And I'm like, Hannah is the worst. She's a liar. She's bad at her job. She's lazy. I don't trust her. Just trashing you. And then I feel better, got it off my shoulders. And then the next day we come back to work and we apologize. There's a misunderstanding. We make up. Well, small problem. Maybe those people I trashed you to last night have told some other people about you. And maybe those people have told people And maybe a month from now, you apply for a job at the company where one of those people works, and they say, wait, I've heard some things about this woman, some work ethic issues or integrity. She has kind of a iffy reputation. Let's hold on this. Let's just hold. Okay, so in 20 minutes of just getting something off my chest, of sort of venting, I've really actually harmed you in a pretty serious way. And I find this so sobering, just the way that I'm casually cruel, casually thoughtless with my speech every day. And by the way, I still mess this up 100 times a day, but I used to mess it up 120 times a day. So I feel like that awareness, it's really changed the way I live day to day, hour to hour.
That awareness of others is obviously now more important than ever. We've got a deeply divided society are really exposed by this current crisis. And I know that in your country, as in ours, you have people rushing to the supermarkets, those who have buying everything and those who have not being left with nothing. And yes. How can we apply those ethics to this situation? And it's not in law, but it feels now like it almost should be.
I know. And it's, I think Judaism has a tremendous, it's so much of Jewish law if you study the Torah, it's so geared around caring for those who are vulnerable. There's just such a focus in our key holy text, again and again, it says care for the stranger, which is quite radical when you think about it, because, in ancient times, the Bible starts with the story of the Israelites who've left slavery in Egypt and they're wandering in the desert. Okay. Things are not going well for them. They're being attacked. They're anxious. They're terrified. They're wandering for decades. And the God of the Bible keeps telling them, love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Newsflash, they're strangers in the desert, right? They are the strangers of the ancient world. They are vulnerable. They are under attack. And God is telling them to be kind to strangers, which means be kind to those who are not Israelites, who are not part of your in-group or kin group. That's an amazing message, that even when we feel like we are struggling, our obligation is to open up to those who are struggling more. And so I think there is just a real sense of needing to have a real sense of community right now, of of being oriented towards others, of being respectful towards others, of just realizing that by doing something as thoughtless as, I'm going to go to a restaurant and bar and with a big group of friends and we're all going to pack in there and then I'm going to go and interact with other people. It's like, guys, this is really you have the power to really hurt people right now. And I think just being so hyper aware of those in our society who are most vulnerable to this thing, people who are in the high risk groups, both older people and people of all ages with underlying conditions, each of us has the power to really harm them. And each of us has the power to really help them by checking in, by delivering groceries, whatever it is we can do. I just think having that real fine-tuned sensitivity to the vulnerable, to the other, to the stranger right now is just, it couldn't be more urgent and more important.
And you write, which really feels very relatable. We can't control what happens to us. This is essentially out of our control, but what you're saying is we can control how we react.
Exactly. No, that's exactly right. And this is, there's many people have read Viktor Frankl, who writes just an extraordinary book. He was a psychoanalyst who was a Holocaust survivor, and he, in the concentration camps, realized quite quickly that the key thing was he couldn't control what was happening, but he could try to make meaning of his circumstances. And obviously, thank God, this is not like the Holocaust in any way, but the point more broadly that I think people throughout the world, millions of people, have taken to their own lives, and that Frankl actually continued to sort of share with people as a psychologist throughout the rest of his life, was that we choose to make meaning from the circumstances that we're given. And I think that that's particularly important right now. And I think one way we can do that is by being very kind to others, reaching out, asking people if they need help, showing love through phone, video, in ways that we would have done in person before. Now we're going to have to do it through screens.
There's so much more to fit in, but I'm going to go to questions relatively soon. So I just want to go, because I said at the beginning we would, and it feels too tempting not to. Before you wrote this book, you were, of course, as I say, at the White House. And you do write a little bit about it in the book. You say, in fact, I was never fully at home in President Obama's voice. And Michelle Obama, the First Lady's voice, was more like yours. Well, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I wrote for President Obama on the '08 campaign and for the first couple of years in the White House. And it was funny, like I did, his voice is more, as commander in chief, it's a more official voice. He tends to be a little bit more cerebral. Whereas I met Mrs. Obama on the '08 campaign, and I actually worked with her on a speech that she gave at the Democratic National Convention, which is the big party nominating convention. And I really clicked with her. I think our voices are similar in that they're more personal, more emotional, and that's really appropriate to the First Lady voice, right? She is not the commander in chief. She is not the first responder. It's a different voice, and so she's more, just I think more conversational and emotional. And in that time when we worked on that speech together, it was a really fraught time because people forget this now, but back in 2008, there was, due to what I think is, in my opinion, a lot of racism and sexism, she was being portrayed as this angry Black woman and just all of this nasty, negative, racist, sexist things being hurled at her. And, this speech was her first chance to really come out before the American public and for 17 minutes on national TV to show them who she really is. And I think people after that speech thought to themselves, wait a second, that woman is lovely and brilliant and patriotic and compassionate, and like, well, all these stereotypes I've been hearing about her, they're not true. And I think to be with her in those moments, working on that speech, it was very intense. I really kind of got to know her. And I didn't have that kind of intense experience with President Obama. So I think, over time, after working for him for a couple of years in the White House, I just decided to move over to writing for her. Which is a very unusual career move in the White House. You usually don't go from the West Wing to the East Wing. So a lot of my coworkers were surprised. I think President Obama may also have been surprised, but it was a really good decision. And I just loved working for her.
If you were there now, I somehow feel you possibly wouldn't ever be, but if you were working for the current administration and you were writing speeches in this time of crisis, what would you be trying to communicate? And are they communicating anything that you would wish them to?
I think the combination of moral depravity and just wanton, horrific, breathtaking incompetence is a large part of the reason why we are in the crisis situation that we are today. It's sort of inconceivable to me that I could ever be in any way part of something like this. I've been appalled and horrified by it from the very beginning. But, in general, what I would want to do at a moment like this of crisis is, first of all, you need to give people accurate, truthful information as soon as possible and as much as possible. In a crisis, people need transparency and they need truthful information because you have to build trust, you have to build credibility. They have to feel like, okay, I'm not being lied to. This person is being very honest with me about what's happening. Number two, you have to have a plan. So I think it's very important to articulate a clear, coordinated plan in a really detailed way that you explain to the American people in clear, detailed way. I think third, it's important to show empathy, to be very clear that you say, I know this is scary. I know it's disrupting people's lives. I know there's a lot of fear and uncertainty and heartbreak right now. I feel it. Like, just really show people that you understand what they're going through. And I think the fourth thing that's incredibly important is it's reassurance and it's hope. It's a sense of, this is very serious. It's very sobering. I've just laid out for you how serious this is, but we're going to get through this. And then finally, a call for unity, a call for really everyone coming together and making this a national project. I think right now, just what we're seeing is kind of each person for their own. It's like, oh God, I got to hoard the toilet paper. I have to do this. I have to take care of my family. There's been no call really for this as a sort of national, almost wartime project. I know Trump is sort of pretending he's a wartime president, but he hasn't really, there hasn't been that call. And I think someone who did this quite well was George Bush. I mean, ultimately not well, but in the days after 9/11, President George W. Bush gave a beautiful speech on September 20th to a joint session of Congress. And that speech is a real example to me of how a leader speaks in a crisis. He very clearly laid out what had happened. He clearly laid out what we were going to do. He talked about the incredible courage of our first responders and so many other people. He called us to come together. He offered hope. It's an extraordinary speech. I disagree, obviously, with the policy solutions that resulted from it, but that was really, I think, the model of how you do this.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to hand over to the Q&A, which is in a box, I think here at the corner of my screen. But if you have a question for Sarah, you just need to write it in your Q&A box, and I'll read it out. So I've got one here, which is, many religions have a mystical tradition and there is much commonality between them. Do you find inspiration in the mystical traditions of other faiths?
That's a great question. I've often said that I think when you get out to the mystical traditions of these various faiths, they almost seem to come together. They're saying something very similar. So I do, I think one of my biggest weaknesses in my own learning is I haven't studied other faith traditions nearly enough. I've done a little bit of reading and learning, but I feel like that's a real gap in my own knowledge, because there's, I believe it was a rabbi named Zalman Schachter Shalomi. He said that there is almost like a religious ecosystem in the world where each of the great traditions, religious traditions, offers some bit of moral wisdom. It offers a body of moral wisdom, moral knowledge, moral imagination, and we need them all. If one of them kind of dies out or falls away, the world loses something very serious. So I think there's just tremendous, tremendous value in studying other traditions. Before I engaged in meditation in a Jewish context, I did it in a Buddhist context. I found it to be tremendously helpful. I'm reading C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity right now, and I'm very moved by it. I've been reading books by a number of Christian authors in the U.S. I really would like to study Islam, Hinduism, other faith, other traditions more closely. So I agree. I think there are some real similarities in the mystical traditions where there's a sense that everything is one, we're all connected. It's the sort of sense of boundlessness and spaciousness that I think are in a lot of these traditions feels very, very similar and very resonant to me as a Jew.
I'm going to alternate between ones about about your faith and ones about your political career, and say what I would have probably loved to ask, what is it really like, someone says, to actually work with the Obamas? I think probably a little bit, but perhaps.
Yeah, it was a total and utter privilege and joy. I mean, this is the thing. The people you saw on TV were the people I saw behind the scenes. Mrs. Obama, President Obama, he is so gracious. He is so kind. He is so calm. He's just this very calm, unflappable guy. But he's so kind. He's so compassionate. Mrs. Obama she's so loving and lovely. She's funny. She'll tease you. I mean, I remember at the end of the administration when, it was really important to her that all of her staff got good jobs after the White House. So she made sure that the communication director got us all, press, like little stories in the media so we could get some boosting of our profile. And, she was really just pushing us, you guys are all, I'm so proud of you. I want you to be in jobs that you truly love, follow your passions. So I met with her just to talk about what I was doing next. And I wanted to write this book on Judaism, but I had no book deal. I didn't even know, had barely anything. It was just this crazy idea I had. And she said, like, okay, so what are you going to do next? And I was just hemming and hawing and rambling. I'm like, oh, I don't know. Maybe I'll freelance. I'm not sure. And finally she stopped me and she's like, I'm a little worried about you. Like, you seem a little bit lost right now. Are you okay? I don't want you just wandering the earth with no purpose. And then I told her, okay, fine. I want to write this book on Judaism. And she was like, that's so great, Sarah. That's great. I'm so proud of you. What an amazing thing to do. And I'll tell you, when the book came out, she sent the most beautiful tweet. I mean, every time I read it, I still want to cry. It was just like 280 characters of love. And working for the Obamas was the greatest honor of my life. Just the greatest honor of my life.
And actually, a few people are saying the same sort of question about being a political speechwriter and how much influence you have on the speech. Someone says, if any. I hope it would be some. And you in the book about the very well-known line from Michelle Obama, when they go low, we go high. I've got that right.
Yes, you got it perfect.
Go higher. I'm just thinking, you said actually that bit was nothing to do with you, but generally
that was her. Yeah. So with people, I mean, with people like the Obamas, like, just to walk you through the process, when Mrs. Obama was giving a speech, I would sit down with her and say, what do you want to say at this event? And she would just dictate paragraphs of vivid, edgy, moving language, stories, ideas, just paragraphs. I mean, she's so naturally gifted, as is President Obama. Like, they're just naturals. And so I would type as fast as humanly possible on my laptop because I wanted to capture verbatim her language, because it was often just so fresh and vivid and moving. And I wanted to make sure I really got it. So I would take that download, which would be, sometimes pages of text, and I would go back to my office and I would shape that into a draft. I would structure it. Sometimes I would mix it in with, language ideas I had, with research I had done. I often would reach out to, let's say she's giving a commencement address at a university for its graduation. I would reach out to the university and talk to staff, faculty, students. So I'd have a sense of kind of where these people were coming from. So I'd sort of take that download, put it into a draft. I would then send it around to my colleagues who would review it really carefully. Policy people, communications people, lawyers, fact checkers. And we were, in the Obama White House, every line of every speech was scrubbed by a team of fact checkers. So speechwriters spent hours going back and forth with them, making sure every number, every idea, every sentence was totally accurate. So then once it had gone through that process, I would give it to Mrs. Obama and she would just edit. She would just handwritten line edits. I would go back and forth. She would edit. I would edit her edits. She'd edit my edit, back and forth. She would sometimes read it out loud just so I could kind of hear it. And I could sometimes hear like, ooh, this sentence is clunky, or this section is boring. And then we would rework it and then she would deliver it. So it was really hers from start to finish. I helped a lot with it, but it was her. So when people say to me, well, she seems so authentic, she seems so real, it's not seems. Like, she's authentic and she's real. And I think the question she was always asking herself was, what is the deepest, most important truth I can tell at this particular moment? That, I think, to her was always like, it seemed to me that was always where she was going, always where she was just trying to get to that deeper, edgier truth and finding a way to articulate it.
There are so many brilliant questions, and I'm sure we might not get through them all, but perhaps people can get in touch with you afterwards if we don't. You mentioned, someone says, few Jewish or rituals, ceremonies that are very focused on family. I love them, but feel they almost don't have a place in our contemporary culture anymore. What is your opinion about them? How important are they for our development as human beings?
I think they are so incredibly important. I mean, I can't emphasize how important it is to have these ancient rituals. Our life cycle rituals, for example, around, the birth of a baby, around the coming of age of a teenager, around getting married, around death. These are transitions in our lives that are very stressful and difficult. And the secular world just offers us market solutions. Oh, you're having a baby? Buy this thing and buy that thing and buy that thing and read these 20 books and get terrified. Oh, you're getting married? Spend $1 million on a wedding. It needs to be perfect. Your napkins need to match your flowers. Oh, did someone you love very much die? Ooh, you need a very expensive casket and a fancy headstone. And it's like, these are not helpful solutions to us in times of crisis. What Judaism says in these times is, okay, we have a ritual that's going to bring your community around you to help you through this moment, to celebrate with you, to mourn with you, to take care of you. I think this is especially true with our mourning rituals, which are exquisite and so profoundly helpful. In the secular world, when someone you love dies, they tell you to buy a bunch of stuff. And then 3 days later, people are like, okay, can you write that memo? Can you come back to work? Can you just kind of move on? Judaism says the opposite. It says, actually, you're not okay right now. You're just not okay. This has been a major tragedy and loss in your life. And for 7 days, we're going to do something called sitting Shiva, which is you sit in your house and your community comes to visit you every day, brings you food, prays with you, kind of carries you through this first horrific, shocking moment. And then for 30 days, you have some restrictions. And then for an entire year, you come together and you say a prayer in community to honor your lost loved one. And then once a year, you have a special ceremony called a yard site where you light a candle and do certain things to honor the loss of your loved one. And what Judaism is saying to you is this is going to hurt for the rest of your life, and you will slowly heal. You will slowly, move on with your life, but give it space, give it time. This is something that's going to always be with you, and we are going to surround you with love and community. So I just cannot emphasize how important rituals like this are in our world today, which is we're often so isolated, so lonely, so disconnected. These rituals are a real antidote to that.
Another great question, which you said you went on the site, you've been on retreats and silent meditation retreats, and they really helped you. What is the distinction, someone asked, between a Jewish silent meditation retreat, which I'm very interested in, and other meditation approaches?
So very little in terms of the structure is actually the answer. These Jewish meditation retreats were created by rabbis who were very deeply versed in Buddhism and who had attended many Buddhist meditation retreats. So if you have attended those kinds of retreats and you attended Jewish one, you'll actually recognize the structure. It's periods of meditation, both sitting and walking meditation, alternating throughout the day, a period of yoga to stretch out because you're sitting a lot, and then a talk in the evening. But what makes it Jewish is that you start the morning by doing a Jewish morning prayer service together. The talk in the evening draws on Jewish sources as opposed to Buddhist sources. The people who lead these are generally rabbis or other kind of Jewish educators or leaders. You do a deep celebration of Shabbat together on Friday night. You have a Shabbat dinner, and then you have a Shabbat service on Saturday morning. And just much of the kind of language, the images, the ideas are drawing from Jewish texts and traditions. So I think in structure, it's pretty similar to Buddhist retreats and other kinds of retreats, but in substance, they're weaving in a lot. It's really heavily based on Judaism. Although I will say these teachers will bring in Buddhist techniques and ideas to the extent that they're helpful with meditation. It's a really kind of open thing, but there's a lot of Jewish content.
And the next one, someone says, to what extent do you think morality should be defined from religion in today's world? Is there room for a hybrid secular religious approach?
Sorry, I missed to what extent should what be defined from religion?
Morality should be defined
by religion. And look, here, I will never, saying that you need religion to be good, saying that you need religion to be moral, that's not true. I think we all know plenty of people who are totally anti-religious, are totally atheists, and are really deeply ethical, moral people. So I would never, ever make that case. Or I don't think you need to believe in God to be moral or ethical. I don't believe that. So I do think that there is a way for morality to be done in a secular context. I personally find it to be a lot less rich and a lot less nuanced and a lot less deep than I've found Jewish ethics to be. When you're looking at a tradition that has people who've been literally for thousands of years sitting and thinking about this and arguing about this and just going into every possible different ethical situation a human being could face and saying, okay, what's the right thing to do here? I just find that to be really powerful and rich. And that could probably be replicated in some kind of secular context. I just haven't encountered something that's as rich and as profound and as meaningful to me. But I certainly would never, ever make the case that you need religion to be an ethical or moral person. That's simply not true.
The next question, we might not get through them all, as I said, I'm afraid, but do you think people can benefit from cherry picking the bits of Judaism or other religions that work for them? So the morning rituals that you mentioned, or do you think people only benefit if they take the entirety of the religion wholesale?
So I think it's very important to learn about all different religious traditions because they all have moral wisdom and traditions and rituals and ideas to offer. So I am a very big fan of learning widely, deeply, greatly. My hesitation with the cherry picking approach is that basically you're making yourself God, right? You're deciding like, oh, this part of this religion is so me, and this part is so me, and this thing is so me, and this affirms me, and this resonates with me. And that's great. Self-affirmation, self-exploration, self-discovery, that's great. Like we should all do that. But when that's the focus, you miss out a little bit on the self-discipline, the self-restraint, the self-sacrifice aspects of religion. I think I see a lot of new age spirituality where people are really focused on the comforting the afflicted aspects of religious traditions. They're not really focusing so much on the afflicting the comfortable aspects. And I think the thing that I think about is like, I'm not amazing. I'm not perfect, right? I'm not perfect. And there's something really powerful to me about stepping into a great religious tradition that has been crowdsourced by millions of people over thousands of years and kind of embracing it in a full way. But I would never say embrace it wholesale. That makes me very nervous. You have to really take your brain and your heart and your basic moral intuition and you have to be very wary. And I think one of the best things I've heard to that end is a rabbi named Ethan Tucker, who says that Jewish law should be a challenge to your id, but never to your superego. And I think that should be true of all religious law. You know, it should challenge your id, your appetites, my greed, my lust, my impatience, my anger, those things. You know, when I feel like, okay, my appetites are kind of being challenged, that's okay. It should never challenge my superego, my conscience. So anyone who tells me, oh, my religious tradition says that gay people are wicked and can't be married, it's like, okay, now you've challenged my conscience. That's wrong, right? You have to be able to have that id versus superego distinction. So I think that's I don't like the idea of embracing wholesale. You have to really bring in your doubting, skeptical, thoughtful mind. But I do think picking and choosing ends up being kind of a self-affirming kind of religious engagement that actually, it reminds me of the way we do social media today, which is that I read the news that affirms my perspective. I look at the Twitter feed that's all about me and where it's a bunch of people agreeing with me. And that makes us narrow-minded and kind of self-righteous and kind of intolerable. So I think it's, the picking and choosing, I'm very nervous about that.
I'm afraid I have to, there's a few questions left on my screen, but I'm going to have to wrap up there because 5 to 7 is the end time. But as I say, I'm sure there's a way, if your question wasn't answered, of getting it to Sarah. We have a little bit more time on our hands, perhaps, so you might be able to reply another way. But I think I'm going to hand back quickly to the Conduit team to say goodbye.
Thank you so much, Hannah. You are such a joy to be in conversation with. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who came.
Yes, and so I want to thank both Hannah and Sarah for tonight's conversation. I think having a little faith is exactly the kind of conversations we need to be having right now. I just wanted to share one of the comments from our participants, if I can pull it up again. Which John Gordon said, I haven't a question, but simply wanted to say that this is the most inspiring conversation imaginable and a source of huge comfort at such a difficult time for everybody. So I feel we've all got a little bit of a warm glow inside following your conversation.
Thank you so much. And I send love to John, who is actually the one who's responsible for organizing this at the beginning, for suggesting it. So thank you to John.
Yes, and so for the Conduit community, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We will be sharing the recording, as I mentioned, if you'd like to share it with the people around you. We will also share links to Sarah and Hannah's activities so you can stay up to date with their news. And in the meantime, I wish you a lovely evening. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.